Today we're going to be talking about evolutionary psychology. Now we're going to be looking at how evolutionary psychologists talk about things that in polite society we're not allowed to mention. So we tend to look at things that we would normally avoid in groups, conversation. And we'll look at some of those things, and we'll also look at some of the methods that are being used, that are used by evolutionary psychologists. And in the first section, which we call adaptive unmentionables, we're going to look at the process of deception, that's self-deception and deceiving other people. And we'll look at the role of gossip, what that does for human beings as an evolutionary adaptation. And in the second section, we'll take a look at evolutionary psychology methods, in particular, the fact that it's a non-judgmental approach. And we'll look at some of the investigation methods that are used. So in the introduction here, we'll just say that in this topic, we'll be looking at how evolutionary psychology examines the hereditary origins of many of our less socially acceptable behaviours. Things that we frown upon in evolutionary times actually enabled us to survive. We'll also look at the research methods used by evolutionary psychologists. Now, the first section, which is adaptive unmentionables. In this section, we'll be looking at how we deceive ourselves and other people. We're looking at our agency detector, and we'll be looking at the gossip as an adaptation, as an adaptive process. So in the first section, the self and other deception, we'll look at how important it is to be able to detect other people's motives. In the second part, our agency detector, we'll see how it improves our reproductive fitness to have such a thing. And in the third part, we're talking about gossip. We'll look at gossip as social grooming and as a protection against cheating, people who want to cheat. Of course, by social grooming, I mean similar to primates that sit down and go through the fur of the other primate and pick out all the bugs and lice. I think we don't do that. We don't regard that as being acceptable behaviour. However, we use gossip as something similar to social grooming. Now, looking at self and other deception, one of the most serious problems that have plagued the human race is that we don't want to know what we're really doing. And this makes it very difficult to investigate. Not only that, we certainly don't want other people to know what we're doing. So when we're trying to investigate human behavior, it's quite difficult to be able to get at the truth by having people tell us what's going on. In fact, there is a network, or a neural network in our brain that quite deliberately causes us or enables us to deceive ourselves and deceive others. And the purpose of this is to make sure that we get on with the process of breeding and raising the next generation and passing our DNA on to the next generation. If we're able to see reality, we may not be so keen to do that. So we have this innate ability to be able to deceive ourselves and therefore deceive other people as well. Now, it's very important that we be able to detect other people's motives, because if we know why people are doing what they're doing, or that they may have good intentions or they may have evil intentions, then we can take appropriate steps to avoid any harm to ourselves. And the thing that helps us do this is our agency detector. So in our brain, we have an evolved agency detector, which is the ability to infer motives to other people. Now, these motives are not always correct. Often probably 99 times over 100, they're not correct. However, it's better to be wrong and take evasive action or take self-protective action than to be, you might say, right. In other words, it's the difference between having a false positive and a false negative. A false positive is much more dangerous than having a false negative. If we are tested, say, for COVID virus, and it says that we are positive when we really aren't positive, then that's not so bad as being tested and being told we're negative when we are actually positive. So our agency detector is an adaptation that we have to help us infer motives or reasons for people doing things. And in competitive situations or competitive settings, it's a good idea to know what our opponents have in mind, or at least be able to reasonably guess what they have in mind. And in cooperative settings, if we can somehow, although it doesn't sound very nice, if we can somehow cheat on the people we're cooperating with and that they don't detect that, they don't know that, then we can get a benefit at their expense. Mind you, we'll find out in a minute that we have a defense against that. Now, the ability to be able to infer the intentions of others and to mask our own intentions from them gives us an evolutionary advantage. In other words, in dodgy times, we are more likely to survive and breed than if we're not able to do that. If we are not able to detect other people's motives or not able to hide our motives from them, then chances are that they will have an advantage over us. Now, the reason that gossip is adaptive is that it enables us to discover who is on the level and who is not. In other words, in a small group, remembering that we're talking about a time in human evolution when the largest number of people wouldn't be more than 100, probably not even that. And these were probably the only people you were going to talk to for the rest of your life, from the beginning, from the time you're born till the time you die. So these people are your whole world. And if someone is trying to cheat or pull the wool over the eyes of the others, then if people can pick that up and pass that knowledge on, then that person will be either thrown out of the tribe, thrown out of the clan, or they'll be severely spoken to and they won't do it again. And the role of gossip in human sociality, like I said before, is very similar to primates grooming each other, sort of going through each other's fur and picking out all the parasites. I believe this is a pleasurable thing to have done to you. And doing this actually provides a bonding, or like a glue process that bonds the primates together. So it's a very important part of living in a group, is to be able to make other people feel good and make other people like you, and then that makes them do good things back to you. Now, where we have dominance hierarchies, we always have dominance hierarchies. There's one thing we will never escape. So long as this species is still in existence, there will always be social dominance hierarchies. It's the way we evolved, and it's the way our brain is structured. There's always going to be a higher status people and lower status people. Even though in modern times we would like to have equality for all, in fact, it has been shown quite dramatically in the recent human history that when you give equality to all, large groups of people, we're talking about groups of millions, just fall apart. It doesn't work. We have to have leadership. Human beings need leadership. They need someone in charge to show them the correct way to do things, and to make sure that those who don't follow the correct way to do things get their comeuppance. But as you have, and the more resources you have, the more babies you'll probably have, and the more babies you probably have, and the more will probably survive to adulthood and breed. So it's a DNA passing on process. So the higher up the greasy pole you are, the higher up the dominance tree you are, then the more likely you're going to have children, and they're going to survive to adulthood, and they're going to have children, and your line of DNA is going to be passed on. So it's always that struggle to get higher up and therefore get more advantage over others, and therefore have our DNA predominate, is inbuilt into us. It can't be taken out. There's no pill we can take. There's no operation they can perform that can remove that from the human brain. Now, as I said, gossip fulfills the function of social grooming. And if you've ever been in a small group of friends or acquaintances, and they start talking about some other person who probably isn't there, most likely isn't there, then it's a bit like having a common enemy, even though you know that this is not necessarily a nice thing to be doing. It's like having a common enemy. And when people have a common enemy, they bond quite closely. And when that enemy goes away, then the people no longer have a bond. The bond falls apart and they start turning on each other. So gossip serves as a way of pulling people together. But not only that, it also provides protection from people in the clan, in the group. Remember, we're always talking about small groups of people here. We're not talking about cities and towns, we're talking about or nations. We're talking about the hunters and gatherers in small clans. And in their world, to know who's not doing the right thing is adaptive. In other words, it enables you to survive better. And if you've got a load of food and someone else in the clan thinks that you don't deserve that, and they should have it because they don't have as much as you got, and they come and they try to trick you, or they try to knock you on the head and take what you've got, and you don't know that that's coming, you don't know that that's happening, then you're at a disadvantage. So it's in a small group like that, being able to pass around information as to who's reliable and who's not reliable is very, very important. Now, we have a thing called reciprocal altruism, and reciprocal altruism is where people who don't have the same DNA actually cooperate with each other. The primary thing that propels people in the human species is sharing the same DNA. And you can see that in countries where the family is everything. In Italy, for example, particularly southern Italy, family is more important than church or state. In other words, you put the family before everything. It's even more important than the individuals in the family. And so that's because they all carry the same DNA, and it's a strong imperative to look after people who have the same DNA. Now, somewhere in human evolution, they discovered that you can pretend that other people have the same DNA as you in order to survive better. In other words, if a group of people get together who don't have the same DNA and look after each other, in other words, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, you do me a favor, I'll do you a favor, that particular group of people does a lot better than a family would on its own. In other words, there's safety in numbers. So families tend to be smaller, groups tend to be larger. So the more people you have who are cooperating with each other, then the safer the environment is. Okay, so that's the unmentionables, the adaptive unmentionables. That's the two things which were having our agency detector and working out what other people are planning to do, and not letting them know what you are planning to do. And the other one is gossip, where for the if we can get information about people who have evil ways or planning to cheat on the group, then you have an adaptive advantage having that information. Now, moving on to the next section, which is evolutionary psychology methods, and we'll be getting into this more as the course goes on. In the first part of this section, we'll be looking at things that we don't say in polite society that we definitely do say in evolutionary psychology. And we'll be looking at the need for the non-judgmental approach. In other words, we don't say that a particular behavior is good or a particular behavior is bad. We simply say this is a adaptive or a non-adaptive behavior. And in fact, a lot of our inherited behaviors, although they were adaptive years ago, actually are not suitable for the large numbers of groups that we live in. In other words, the desire to grab as much food as you can for yourself, or much of the earth's resources for yourself, and keep it, and to hell with everybody else, was adaptive. In other words, that enabled us to survive. It didn't enable the other people to survive, but enabled the people who are doing the robbing and cheating to survive better. Now, in our day, we don't look on that as being a acceptable form of behaviour. We would prefer that everybody was fair, just and fair to each other, and everybody gave each other a fair go. However, our brains aren't wired that way. Our brains are wired to protect in other words, people with our DNA, to give a best advantage, the most advantage to the people who share our DNA, and to hell with everybody else. Except when we need to practice reciprocal altruism. But reciprocal altruism is not possible in huge numbers of people, because to practice reciprocal altruism, you have to know that the person that you are aiding is or helping is going to someday in the future help you back. And it's not easy in a large city to help a person on the basis that sometime in the future they'll do something for you, because you may never ever see them again. It'll be the once and only time you'll ever see them. We've gotten around that way, that problem with religion. Religion has given us a reason to assist people that we will never see again. It gives us brownie points in heaven, and we'll go higher up the dominance hierarchy in heaven. Yeah. Okay. But it's not a bad idea to do that, because reciprocal altruism in any size group is a good thing. It provided you are not disadvantaging yourself and your descendants' survival possibilities. Okay, and we look at some of the investigation methods, which are observations, experiments, comparisons, demographic analyses, and all of those things are done with an evolutionary viewpoint. In other words, it's when they look at human behavior, no matter what the method is they're using to look at the behavior, the lens that they're always looking through is the lens of natural selection, evolution by natural selection. And of course sexual selection as well. And how does this behavior fit into the theory of natural selection, and vice versa? So looking at the first item on the list, which is not in polite society, well, some of the subjects evolutionary psychologists talk about are politics, sex, religion, violence, and our true thoughts, feelings, and motivations. And as we already said, that we are very averse to letting people know our true thoughts, feelings, and motivations, lest they have a evolutionary advantage over us. They have a better survival chance than we do if they know what we really think and really intend. And that's quite strong, that need to keep your true thoughts and your true feelings and your true motivations a secret. In fact, we're so good at it, we keep it from ourselves as well as from other people. Even we don't know what we're doing. And that brings us to the point of, are we a rational species? In my estimation, no, we're not a rational species. We are a rationalizing species. In other words, our evolution and our environmental, caused behaviours and our emotional motivations make us do things. And after we've done something, then our rational mind comes in and tries to explain it away. In other words, put a spin on it, put a positive spin on it. So in my estimation, we're not a rational species. We are a rationalizing species. Now, some of the examples of topics that evolutionary psychologists are concerned with that are not allowable in polite society are copulating with multiple mates, injuring and killing people for personal gain, rape, murder, incest, theft, and the whole list of deadly sins: pride, envy, anger, greed, gluttony, sloth, and lust. And things like humility, admiration, calm, generosity, temperance, industry, and love are also studied, but and their adaptive value is considered as well. So it's not always bad news, but we don't leave out the bad part. So we include the whole lot. We include the positive, what we would put up. I mean, in our society, we'd put a judgment on it and say this bit is positive and this bit is negative. But remember, as evolutionary psychologists, we don't do that. We don't say this is positive or this is negative. We say this is adaptive or this is non-adaptive. In other words, this will enable us to live and reproduce and raise our children to the age where they can reproduce, or it doesn't, or it has the opposite effect. So we're not really interested in the moral question. We're only interested in the evolutionary question. Now, that doesn't mean that morals don't come into it. In fact, morals are a big part of reciprocal altruism. In fact, much of our natural or innate moral behavior is a product of reciprocal altruism. In other words, over millions of years, we have discovered that if we behave appropriately to people in a way that enhances their life chances, then they're going to do it back. So that everybody benefits. So if we act in a moral way, everybody benefits. If we start acting in a destructive or a non-moral way, then nobody benefits. We don't benefit, and they don't benefit, and the group as a whole doesn't benefit. Okay, so that's moving on now to the non-judgmental approach. So science in general, not just evolutionary psychology, is not really interested in how things should be. It's interested in how things are. So evolutionary psychology is not interested in how things ought to be. It's only interested in how things are. However, once you know how things are, and you want to change how things ought, change things to how they ought to be, then you have a better advantage than being in the dark. You can't fix something that you can't see. In other words, if you can't see what the problem is, you can't fix it. So the more you can see about what makes human beings do what human beings do and why they do it, then the better chance that the individual and the group has at fixing it. Now, some of the investigation methods used are simple observations, controlled experiments, natural experiments, comparisons between species, and comparisons within species. And also comparisons between males and females, comparisons between individuals, looking at different contexts of behavior, same person in the different context, comparisons between the same individual at different times, and demographic analyses where they go to the census statistics and they pull out different sort of, would you say, phenomena, group phenomena that you see in the statistics, and then see if that phenomena does fit evolutionary, the evolutionary viewpoint. Can you sort of say this phenomena is compatible with this aspect of human evolution. Now, getting back to the first item, which is simple observations. Well, that's quite, like I said, it's simple. You go out there, you probably take a notebook, or these days you might take a digital device of some sort, and you observe people and you make notes of what they're doing. Then go back to your bedroom or wherever you go, you study, and trying to come up with some sort of explanation or patterns, patterns of behaviour there. Controlled experiments, well, that's the good old-fashioned random controlled trials, where randomized controlled trials where you pick people at random, and you have a control group and an experimental group, and the people in the experimental group get the intervention, whatever it might be, and the people in the control group get a placebo or don't get anything. And then you compare what happens between the two, in the control group and what happens in the experimental group. And if there's no difference, then you know that whatever it was you were experimenting with or on was absolutely ineffective. If there's a significant difference between the outcomes in the two groups, then you can say that what you did was most probably effective. And the thing about science, of course, is even with the best of scientific methods, the most pure, the most holy, the most righteous of scientific methods, when you get the data, it's still up to a human being to interpret the data. So there's never any point in science where opinion isn't involved. In other words, we have religion where there's no science, just opinion. The whole thing is based on opinion. We have a lot of philosophies which are also based on opinion and no data. You get science, and in science, yes, they go on for the data, so they go out and see what is actually happening out there in the world, and then they come back with their data and they sit down in their lounge chair, hopefully not in front of the television, and they consider what does it all mean? What does all this data mean? What patterns can we see in this data? And that inevitably almost always come back to a human mind. Even the best of artificial intelligence can't reach the sorts of judgments about human behaviour that a human mind can do. A human artificial intelligence is very good at some things, excellent, matter of fact, better than a human mind at some things. But when it comes to assessing very complex data, the human brain is still the best. So the take-home message there is you can't get away from human opinion, even in the best of science. Then they can have natural experiments where they go out into the wild and they don't set anything up. They just wait until a particular conditions occur, and then they observe what's going on. And that's a bit like saying, well, we haven't intervened, we haven't done anything here. It's just that nature has done something, and we're observing what the results are from nature's intervention. And we have comparisons between species, and this is quite a big part of evolutionary psychology. We rely a lot on things we have observed in chimpanzees and the gorillas and other members of the primate species, because remember that the chimpanzees and us share 95% of our DNA. There's very little in our DNA library that is unique to human beings, separate from chimpanzees. So when we're looking at chimpanzees and gorillas and other primates, we're actually looking at how we were or may have been way back. And it's mainly not so much to do with individual behaviours, it's more to do with group behaviours, how they behaved as a group, what their political behaviours were, what their, you might almost say, religious behaviours were, or ritual behaviours, and what their warlike behaviours were like, what their hunting behaviours were like, what their marital relations were like. And that gives us a pretty good idea of how we got to be the way we are. That's because you cannot say that at some point everything changed suddenly and we were nothing like them. We were very different from them. No, it didn't happen like that. Um, in fact, just a little like digression here. The thing that did change for human beings is at a certain point in human evolution, the planet got very, very dry. The forests receded. So before that, the human species lived in the trees. And in the trees, they could climb up to a high branch and see the predators coming or see the prey coming. So observation wasn't too hard. And they didn't need to stand on two legs. They were quite happy going along, we might say two and a half legs. They sort of use their back legs, but they'd still have their knuckles on the ground. And they'd be running around on all fours. And then the trees started to thin out, started to disappear. And they found themselves living in grasslands. And of course, the grasslands were tall grass. And in order to see prey, in order to see predators, it was necessary to get up above the grass. So little by little, they learnt to stand on their hind legs. Now, the problem with standing on your hind legs is that it takes a hell of a lot of brain power to not fall over, to move forward, to move sideways, to move backwards, to do anything at all. It takes, on two legs, takes an awful amount of brain power compared to using all fours. And that meant that since we now had to stand up in order to survive, we needed a bigger brain. So that's where things changed. But then our brains weren't that much bigger than chimpanzees. So we separated from chimpanzees about 2 million years ago. We separated from gorillas, chimpanzees and humans separated from gorillas about 6 million years ago, although we weren't chimpanzees and humans, and we were some other species. And then when we separated, one went one way and became chimpanzees, the others went the other way and became hominins or humans. And then we started to stand on hind legs, our brains got bigger. And because our brains got bigger, they got bigger and bigger really fast. In other words, they got more complex and complex really fast, because it's sort of they'd gone through a sort of a gateway, as it were, a gateway to having a bigger and more complex brain than you would need to walk around on all fours. And then things got worse and worse after that. And in my opinion, that was natural selection's biggest mistake. If you look at what we're doing to the world today and how stupid the human race can be and how stupid our politicians are, what poor leadership there is, you can say, well, what is it about this human brain? There's something not quite right with it. But anyhow, let's not get all despondent. There's light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope. And that's what we're having to find in this series of lectures. Okay, so they have species comparisons, and they have comparisons within species. Excuse me, or different sections of species. Different sections of species will behave differently in different contexts, different environments, and from that they can infer things about their evolution, how the different environments, the different contexts change the evolutionary processes. We look at male-female comparison, and that's mainly for the purpose of sex roles, not mean who's a housewife and who's the breadwinner, not that sort of sex role. It's more who plays what role in procreating children, who does what, and how they do it, and how they get together, and what sort of behaviours do they exhibit? Are they what do you call it, polygynous? Are they monogamous? Are they what sort of behaviours do they have? And of course, I mean, you don't need to be Einstein to realise that when it comes to the procreation or the breeding part of the human species or human life, that males and females do it differently. So we have different attitudes, different approaches, and different ways and different jobs to do in that process. We can look at differences between individuals within a particular group, and see whether they've been affected by different environments. And this happens a lot with twin studies. They take twins that have been separated at birth or close to birth and have been taken off to completely different environments. And they track these people down later in life. And I mean, if they agree, they get back together again, and they examine their differences and their similarities. And the similarities that occur are astonishing, almost mind-blowing, as to how similar people can be that have never seen each other before since birth. You know, they've been in separate environments, separate homes, separate types of parents, different countries even. But the similarity in how they live, their behaviours are, what their preferences are, is astonishing. So that lets us know that the inherited behavioural traits are very powerful, but it doesn't mean the environment isn't involved. Yes, the environment does have a part to play in human behaviour, but it's more to do with whether particular inherited traits get switched on or not. So that's where the environment comes in. It's like in a certain environment, a particular behavioural trait will stay dormant, won't switch on. It's like every male has a warrior neural network, but not every male is going to be in a situation where it gets switched on. So they may never ever behave like a warrior in their whole life. It's not that they can't, it's just that they are never ever in the environment where it happens. And anyone who goes in for serious military training will be put through a process where that neural network is switched on. I don't know that the people who were doing the switching on knew exactly what they were doing, but they knew after tens of thousands of years training soldiers that if you do this, then you're going to get warriors. And if you don't do that, you won't get warriors. It's all a part of having the right context to get the behavior. So just because you inherit a particular propensity for particular behavior depends a lot upon the environment that you're in, whether that behavior shows itself or not, or to what degree it shows itself. Also, time comparisons. You look at groups or individuals over time, how they've changed over time, and see how this relates to the whole evolutionary process. And we look at demographic analyses where they take statistical data from census statistics and see if there's any patterns emerge from there that can be explained by evolutionary processes. And as I mentioned at the beginning, all the things that evolutionary psychologists do are done through the lens of evolution by natural selection. In other words, when they look at a human individual or a human group, human relationship, they're always doing it from a point of view of how did natural selection bring this about? And it's not about what's happening in the unconscious mind. It's not about what learning theory or what particular philosophy was involved here. No, it's all about can this particular behavior be explained in an evolutionary way? In other words, as a result of our evolutionary environment, remembering that our evolutionary environment was vastly different from the environment that we live in today. In other words, in the last 12,000 years, the difference is so great that prior to 12,000 years ago, human beings lived as part of nature. And what that really means is when they were walking around, they weren't thinking about things in their head that happened yesterday or might happen tomorrow. They were looking at every blade of grass, every tree. They're looking for food, either looking for food or looking for danger. So they were living outside their heads. Now, after 12,000 years ago, when we started living in towns and cities, there was no natural environment. So we couldn't live in the natural environment anymore. So to live in the crowded prehistoric early cities was definitely not a pleasant thing to do if you're living outside your head. So what human beings did from the invention of agriculture onwards was we started to live inside our heads. And that means that the way we view life, the way we live life is vastly different from the way that the pre-civilization people did, because we have constructed a whole world inside our head, and we sort of share that between people. We share it with our children, we share it with students at school. We all make sure that we're all thinking the same things and living the same things inside our heads as much as possible. But the problem with that is that the world we've created inside our head is not real. It's imaginary. And we're trying to make sense of an imaginary world and fix an imaginary world. But it can't be done. In other words, the only thing that can be fixed is the real world, the one that we live in externally. In other words, the natural world, the world we live in. And the purpose of evolutionary psychology is to come to grips with that, to take a look at what is actually happening, not what is happening in a fantasy world inside our head. Okay. Now, in conclusion, we'll look at the problem of deception. We'll look at our overactive agency detector. We'll look at beneficial gossip and how we always have an evolutionary viewpoint. So with the problem of deception, it's that because we like to deceive ourselves and deceive other people, then investigating human behavior can be a problem. Even the investigator has some blind spots. There's some things that they don't want to see. In fact, the less the observer knows about themselves, the more blind spots they're going to have, and the less they'll see in other people. And if you ever go to a counselor or a psychotherapist, make sure you go to one who knows themselves inside out. There's no part of themselves that they haven't examined, because that way they have clear sight. If there's a part of themselves they don't want to see, then they definitely won't be able to see that in you. It'll go completely unobserved, unnoticed. So that's the problem of deception. And looking at our overactive agency detector in evolutionary times, it was a very important thing. In other words, it gave us an advantage, a survival advantage, if we knew that animal over there or that person over there had evil intentions against us. The animal was going to have us for lunch, or the evil person was going to knock us on the head and take everything we own. And of course, if we could surmise that, then we could do something about it. And if we were wrong, in other words, they really weren't going to do that, it still doesn't matter because we're still safe. The problem would come as if we took the positive view and said, oh, they're nice people, that's a nice animal. I think I'll go and pat that nice animal. Or I'll go and make friends with that nice person over there with the big club. Yeah. So it's better to be wrong about someone being a danger than to be wrong about them not being a danger. Okay. That reminds me of a cartoon I saw when I went to Kangaroo Island years ago, and I went to see the seals. They've got a colony of seals there on a particular beach on the national park. And in the national park reception office, they had a cartoon on the wall, and the cartoon had a tourist putting their hand out towards a seal, and the seal looking up at the tourist. And there was a thought bubble above the tourist's head, and the thought bubble said, "Oh, what a lovely little seal." And the thought bubble in the above the seal's head said, "Oh, lunch." So the seal was going to have the hand of the tourist for lunch. Yeah. Okay. Gossip, of course, we've seen that gossip is beneficial. It can be beneficial. If you need to know that a particular person is going to be a cheating in the reciprocal altruism department, or that they're got evil intentions, or that they're not what they seem to be, then finding that out from your friends and acquaintances is good. However, if you're just out for character assassination just for the fun of it, then that's not good. That is not adaptive at all. Okay. And then, of course, in all that we're doing in this subject, we always take an evolutionary viewpoint. We don't worry about what Freud had to say. We don't worry about what the behaviourists had to say. We don't worry about what the cognitive behavioural therapy have to say. We don't worry about what anybody has to say. All we're worried about is, does this behaviour fit evolution by natural selection or sexual selection? And you'll be surprised when we go through it, how it all pans out. So after this one, we'll get into evolutionary psychology proper. So bye for now and have a good one.